Hello everybody and welcome back to the F2 show. I'm your host Fraser Ford, and joining me to look ahead to this weekend we have Autosport's Formula 2 and Formula 3 reporter Megan White, and we also have Inside F2 editor LA Wilshaw. Coming up on the show then, we look ahead to Formula 2 heading to Zandvoort for the first time this weekend. There are always ins and outs at this stage of the season in Formula 2, so we take a look at who's part of the merry-go-round for this weekend. And we take a look at some teams up and down the grid and work out what's going well and what's not. Okay, but before we do all of that, Megan, first time on the show with us. Welcome. How are you? And what have you made of the Formula 2 season so far?
Hello, Fraser. Thank you for having me. Really good to be on the show. It's been a great season so far. Really exciting. Lots of good racing. You know, glad to see the title fight back reignited. Won't talk too much about this weekend for Teo Porcher's sake, but you know, it's been a great season so far. You know, Drugovich has been doing an incredible job, and it's been brilliant to see. There's been some incredible racing. You know, rookies performing really well. People who've been in it for a couple of years not doing so well. So it's been really interesting viewing, and I think the final 3 rounds are absolutely crucial for the likes of Drugovich and Porcher's, you know, title hopes.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they? It's game on until the end of the season. Who has been your standout driver so far this season, and why is it Felipe Drugovich?
Controversially, it isn't. So I think Felipe's done an incredible job. He's, you know, done an amazing racing to be leading the championship by the margin that he is, especially from someone like Teo. My standout driver is Jack Doohan, because he's, despite having done a few rounds at the end of this last year, which means he doesn't consider himself a rookie, he is, according to the entry lists, a rookie. And he's had an amazing season. You know, he's 4th in the standings. He's a rookie. He's driving for a team that traditionally are not, you know, championship winners in F2. And he's been putting in some incredible performances. Look at this weekend. You know, he had fantastic weekend. He finally got that first feature race win, you know, after that heartbreaking first round in Bahrain, and he's been doing really well. And I think, you know, to his credit, he finished 2nd in F3 last year. Dennis Hauger, who came first, isn't up there in the standings. So I think Jack has done a really, really fantastic job, and all credit to him for that.
Completely agree, and you do wonder how his season would have been. I think he was 17th. I think he was in the standings after Imola, and you wonder if he'd hooked up those first few rounds, where he would have been, and if he would have been in the championship battle. LA, you weren't on the Spa review, and listeners can go and check that out if they haven't done so already. But yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on Spa. Obviously, a bit of a game-changing weekend, as we've just said, in the championship battle.
Yeah, I mean, there's other drivers that have been showing a bit of promise as well, like Iwasa. And, you know, we had him spinning, Hauger leaking fluid, Cordial exceeding the track limits, Fittipaldi and Beckman coming off the circuit, and that was only in practice at Spa, you know, let alone in quali. Vips and Doohan spinning, Lawson just missed Yuri as he did his spin right in front of him, and Beckman had an outstanding qualifying session, didn't he, getting that Van Amersfoort car into P5 after taking over Jake Hughes' seat. And of course, I mean, you know, outstanding drivers, Liam Lawson, you know, he's had a few struggles. He's not quite clicked with this Callan car every single race weekend, but he's really impressing me. And I feel that maybe that drive that he did for AlphaTauri in the FP1 was just probably give him a bit of a boost, because you saw that outstanding start he had in the feature race. You know, he went onto the grass. How he progressed past other cars, getting himself into P1 from 5th on the grid by lap 2, you know, and he didn't really look back, did he? Because he won that sprint race and then came 3rd from P5 in the feature race. So it was like a double podium for him. And just like Megan said, Jack Doohan, double podium for him as well, who came 2nd in the sprint race and won that feature race, you know, his first feature race win. And that was with massive pressure from Felipe Drugovich behind him for those few laps, you know, where he struggled to actually overtake some cars. And then, you know, Drugovich is right on his tail. Kept it together, kept it on the circuit. You know, I know we're going to talk about other drivers in more depth, but another winning story was Boschung making a fantastic comeback after his injury, you know, to get himself into the top 10 in qualifying in 10th and then be on reverse pole, you know, and he held on in that sprint race to finish in 3rd with with another Drugovich coming up really fast behind him. But I think he alluded to the fact that he didn't even realise that was happening. You know, I'm sure he'd have seen him in his mirrors before too long. But for me, it was a typical Spa, you know, typical F2 weekend with safety cars and restarts. You know, sadly, there were some losers. Logan Sargent, you know, one of the causes of one of the safety cars in the sprint race. Fittipaldi received a couple of penalties, and he's been doing an incredible job at Charouz. And then we've got Poucher, DNF, you know, Hauger receiving a couple of time penalties. There were drivers that we kind of thought would be championship contenders that just are not pulling it together, even at this stage of the season. You know, you think by now drivers are a bit more settled, but there's just no settling for some of them. And we just thought, I'm not sure about you two, but I thought we're going to get away without a safety car in that feature race. And just at the end, second to last lap, Zandelli pulls off and brings out a little cheeky virtual safety car. So yeah, almost got away with that, but didn't quite.
Yeah, so many talking points, isn't there, off the back of the weekend. We covered a lot of them in the weekend review. One that we didn't, and one that hasn't been mentioned there either, is obviously Tatiana Calderon returning to Formula 2, which is a great story, replacing Jen Bollick-Bassi in the Charouz. What did you make of her return, LA? It was a solid first weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's really sad news that Jem, you know, was out of his Charouz seat, and we don't have too many details on that. And obviously, you know, we're not going to go into detail about it. But Tatiana was given a fantastic opportunity to come back. From a female point of view, of course, it's amazing. You know, it's going to inspire so many thousands and thousands, we're talking about, of young girls who aspire to be in Formula racing, to see her drive a few years ago and then to be able to come back into the sport. And whether you want to say it was poetic or poignant that it was a Spa weekend, you know, the last time she raced in Formula 2 was 2019, where she was teammates with Anthoine Hubert at Arden, and it was really nice for her to be back with the Charouz team manager Kenny Kerwin, who was at the Arden team back then as well. And I can only hope that helps with the healing process of what happened, you know, and also gives her quite a boost, quite a big boost in her own racing career, performance-wise, as you've just said. I expected her to obviously not be on par with everybody else. You know, you can't just jump into a Formula 2 car and expect to even be mid or top, you know, of the field, especially after taking such a long break. Plus, we have to bear in mind the rims have changed since then. And so she's got into this, you know, this practically almost a brand new car, really, that the others have got used to. And I think what was amazing was that, you know, when those around her were losing their heads, she kept it on track. She brought that car home, and she finished the sprint race in 20th and the feature race in 18th. Well done to her.
Completely agree, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what she does for the rest of the season. Obviously, she'll be in until Abu Dhabi, which we're looking forward to. Okay, let's take a look at the championship standings before we go into this weekend. Felipe Drugovich is sitting pretty at the top of the standings after extending his lead to 43 points last time out. His championship rival Théo Pourchaire will be hoping to bounce back with a good performance this weekend. A strong weekend for Jack Doohan, as we've just mentioned, moves in within 6 points of Logan Sargent. They sit third and fourth. Liam Lawson and Enzo Fittipaldi round out the top six. And the team standings? It's really tight at the top of the team standings, just 20 points separating ART at the top, Carlin in second and MP in third. Poor weekends for High Tech and Prema, they remain fourth and fifth. And Virtuosi round out the top six. And the full standings are available, as always, on our website, www.insidef2.com. Okay, Megan, enough about last weekend. We've spoken about that a little bit. This is the Zandvoort preview show, so let's talk about Zandvoort a little bit. It's the first time that Formula 2 will be heading to the Netherlands this weekend. What can we expect? Is it going to be a tough weekend in terms of overtaking? It's quite a tight track, isn't it?
The short answer is yes. I think it's not going to be anything like Spa. I think qualifying at Zandvoort is going to be absolutely crucial. Not that it isn't usually, but I think it's going to be especially crucial here. Looking back to last year, F3 raced at Zandvoort last year when F2 and F3 were split slightly. And some of the F3 drivers did actually say they were surprised at how many opportunities there were. Victor Martins and Fred Vesti were two of the drivers from F3 last year, now in F2, who said that they were, actually there were more opportunities than they'd expected. And Martins made up 4 places in race 2, going from P5 to win the race. So there are chances to overtake. It's just not as easy as circuits like Spa that we've just had, or Monza that's to come. So it could be mixed, but I think, turns 1, 3 and 13 are ones to watch. And F1 obviously raced there last year for the first time since all the renovations, and did enjoy the banking. There were drivers who did, there were chances to overtake. The race, again, wasn't the most thrilling race of last year. It's a very tight and narrow circuit. But I think that there could still be some surprises to come. And I think, knowing how unpredictable F2 is and has been this year, anything can happen. But I think the most important thing is nailing qualifying, lining up at the front, and not making any mistakes is the main thing there, because it's so easy for things to go wrong.
Yeah, I tell you what, I'm really excited to see Formula 2 cars on the banking, especially as there's about, 6 different lines you can take through the banking on the corners, isn't there? So I think
it will be wild.
It really will. I think on lap 1 you're going to have cars all over the place. LA, you're off to Zandvoort this weekend, aren't you? There's a lot of gravel traps around, aren't there? And obviously we saw in Formula 3 last season that some of the drivers, they went for overtakes maybe on the outside. There was couldn't quite make it stick, and they did end up on the gravel. Do drivers have to be a little bit more strategic with their overtaking?
I'm not sure about strategy, but definitely their skill. They definitely need to use their skill. Spa, with their new circuit, their new gravel traps, was probably quite a good race to have just before Zandvoort, with the fact that they had to mentally get that into their head that there were gravel traps. And of course we saw a couple of them get caught out by them. So yeah, I'm quite sure that they'll have those in mind already, knowing that once they go into that's the end. But then again, it's F2, isn't it? So they need to really go for that. And as you say about the banking, I think we noticed in F1 last year that they weren't actually using the entire bank. And from a fan point of view, I was a little bit disappointed, because I wanted to see them sort of go right up, but they seem to find a lower line. And so it'd be interesting to see what the Formula 2 guys do, and where they can find their best line. But, do not disregard any of those drivers, somebody like Iwasa, that will absolutely not think twice about trying to do an overtake up the bank on the outside. Those are the kind of drivers I'm really looking forward to seeing, that kind of seem to have... I don't want to say no fear, because they've all got no fear. They're all racing drivers and they drive very fast cars, but they just seem to have that little extra element of maybe craziness. I don't know, but it's going to be absolutely so exciting to see what they can do. And, it's a new circuit for some of them. So, as Megan just said, there are quite a few drivers that we saw from last season: Logan Sargent, Novalak, Iwasa, and Hauger, that did okay last year in the Formula 3, and they will have a big advantage over those that have never been to that circuit. From my point of view, it looks as small and as narrow as a karting track, and I can't wait. I'm really excited, and of course, as you said, I'm going, so I'm even more excited that I'm going.
Have you got your orange flare ready, LA, to fit in with the Max Verstappen fans, or?
No.
You've got a job to do, to be fair, haven't you? You can't be in the grandstands with waving an orange flare around.
No, I won't be waving an orange flare. No, I'm not a Max Verstappen Red Bull fan. Sorry.
Megan, back to the serious stuff.
I'm going neutral. I'll go Mick Schumacher. I'll go Matt Yuki Tsunoda. I'm going to go my F2 drivers.
Megan, back to the serious stuff. It's a good point that LA makes, that obviously there was Formula 3 there last season. Does that kind of give a little bit of an advantage to the Formula 3 drivers? Obviously, the experience that they gained from last season.
Yeah, definitely. I think the likes of Jack Doohan and Fred Vesti and the other rookies, Logan Sargent, who've driven there last year, whether some of the other drivers have driven there in the past or not, which they're unlikely to have recently, but I think having visited there last year will give them a massive advantage, especially at a circuit where it is tough to overtake. They will know exactly where it is that they can make those moves. And I think, as LA said, I think it will be an exciting one in terms of where those overtakes take place. Is it NASCAR or is it F2 on the banking? So yeah, I think it'll be a good race.
And Dennis Hauger, a winner in Formula 3 around Zandvoort last season. LA, do you think he needs a good result, right? Premier need a good result. We're going to talk about them and their struggles later on in the podcast, but they need a good result, don't they?
Yeah, Dennis does. He was on the round table on Thursday last week, and he'd come back from the summer break quite refreshed, very relaxed. Taking a lot of positives, even from the negatives that had happened to him, which is all a driver can do. That those are the best drivers among us that can turn that around and try to. He came into Formula 2 as the F3 champion. There was a lot of expectations on his shoulders, especially because of the year before, with rookie Piastri winning and the Prema drivers winning as well, with the year before that with Mick winning. So he comes into Prema and such the world on his shoulders, really. And so this season's been a bit of a surprise and a bit of a shock, I think, for all of us regarding Prema and their results. And we all wish all the teams well, and we all wish they can all do well and they can pull it together. And absolutely for Dennis, he was such a lovely, humble young man. And he just deserves, they all deserve it, but he deserves a break, and he deserves the best result that he can possibly get.
Yeah, fingers crossed for him this weekend. And we haven't had any proper chaotic Formula 2 weekends in a little while. So I kind of got my fingers crossed for a bit of chaos this weekend. I know we've spoken about it a lot on the show recently, but it is a major talking point. So we'll go back to it. I know you're a big Théo Pourchaire fan, LA. He had a tough weekend in Spa. Is it a make or break weekend for him this weekend? Is it as simple as he needs to win the feature race to keep his title chances alive? 43 points it's a massive gap, isn't it?
It is a massive gap now. If you remember a few races ago, we were talking about sort of a 50 odd point gap that didn't seem that huge because there were so many races in front of us. Whereas now they're getting, fewer and far between. And it's going to become very, very difficult now for him to claim those points back and for Felipe to not score whatsoever in the next few races, which kind of seems a little bit unlikely because this coming race is MP Motorsport's home race, in Holland, in the Netherlands. So you're expecting MP to do very well. You're expecting to carry that extra second per lap, that home spirit, the team spirit. I think Théo is going to be in the fight of his life, to be honest, to now have an opportunity to win that championship. It looks more likely it's going to be Felipe now. It really does. But it was such a shame though, wasn't it? Because Pourchaire went into the summer break with that win from Hungary, and it was so positive, and yet it all came undone this weekend. So it is possibly the end of his championship hopes. But it's Formula 2, anything can happen, and it will be the comeback of the century if he does win this championship, and as you say, I like him. I'm a big fan of Théo's, as him as a person as well. He's a Daniel Ricciardo of Formula 2, isn't he? He's always got a smile on his face. He makes you feel happy if you see him from 300 yards away, because you can see the smile, you can see all this, shining off him. So yeah, I wish him well, and let's hope he takes Felipe right up to that final race as we've seen in the last couple of seasons.
I think, unfortunately for Théo, he and Charles Leclerc are not in dissimilar positions at this point, where the championship is not out of reach. It's there, but it would take a lot. I mean, Leclerc would need to outscore Verstappen by 12 points every round for the remainder of the season for him to win. And Théo has got a lot of opportunities. We've got 2 races per round, and we've got 4 rounds left. It's three rounds left. It's not unachievable, but it's going to take a lot of problems for Drugovich and a lot of good luck for Pourchaire if he's going to get that title at this point.
It really is, isn't it? It's a big gap, but as you say, LA, it's Formula 2, and anything can happen in Formula 2. We know that very well. Megan, I want to talk about Felipe Drugovich a little bit. I know, obviously, he said this weekend his focus is still on getting into Formula 1 for 2023. Realistically, is that a possibility? And is he ready for Formula 1? Do you think if he was to make that step up, do you think that do you think he's ready for it?
I think that what Felipe would really benefit from, and he said the same thing himself, would be a year as a test reserve driver for one of the teams. He hasn't tested an F1 car, so he can't. It's very unlikely that he's just going to get an F1 race seat and So I think what if I was Felipe's manager, I would be trying to get him into a test or reserve role for next year with an F1 team. He doesn't have any links with any F1 teams. I'll come on to that in a sec, but he is a driver who could really benefit from a year with the team, test a reserve role, and build that relationship, build that experience, get some testing in, get some FP1s in, and then go from there. Somewhere like, and this is not me saying this with any insider info, this is just, if as an example, I would suggest that a team like Aston Martin or McLaren, they don't have really a junior academy structure. So to have a reserve liked Felipe would be a great move. If I was one of those teams, it's the sort of thing I would be looking at doing. I unfortunately am not an F1 team principal, unfortunately probably for me and not anyone else, but I would say, getting in a reserve or a test role for one of those teams would be a great move for him. He said, I asked him a bit more about this in one of the press conferences, and he said that he thinks that his lack of F1 links actually helps him in some ways, because he's not pushed into a position somewhere, like some drivers who may or may not have some contractual issues at the moment. Not naming any names, but there's some CRB meetings there. But, he's completely free. He hasn't got any ties. He's not constrained. And he thinks that works really well for him, because the spaces that are available are at those teams that don't have those strong academies. Liam Lawson is AlphaTauri and Red Bull's test and reserve driver, but a team, McLaren or Williams have got Sargent, but like McLaren or Aston Martin, someone like that is where he can be looking at getting that opportunity. I don't think a race seat is realistic, but I think a test and reserve role for 23 with an option for 2024 would be, if he's still trying to get into F1, would be his best bet at this point, I think.
Well, I kind of have to agree with you, Megan, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him in a green shirt next season.
I think Aston Martin's an interesting option, isn't it? And obviously with Fernando Alonso going there as well, a great opportunity to learn from one of the greatest that's ever done it. So I think that would be a good option for Felipe Drugovich, wouldn't it? So, okay, moving on then. No points for Prema, as we've already mentioned, since La Castellet, which seems like a lifetime ago. They're really, really struggling at the moment. Why do you think that is, Megan?
Honestly, I don't know. I actually spoke to Dennis and to Jehan recently. If you go over to autosport.com, you can read my feature. And I spoke to both of them. I spoke to little plug there. I spoke to Jehan in Austria, and I spoke to Dennis last week on the phone. And they both sounded a bit confused too, because they've had good pace, they've had good potential. Neither of them seem to really think it's a car problem. Jehan said in January that he faces a make or break year this year. And I think that is the case for him. He is ending, this is going to be the end of his F2 career. So what he does next year is entirely based on how this year goes for him. And he sounded like he was kind of targeting a tester reserve role as well. And given that he has tested a McLaren recently, that wouldn't be an entirely unsurprising move, despite him being a Red Bull junior, given that there are so many of them as well. But, I think that'll be an interesting thing to see where he goes. But he said he's still struggling with qualifying, and he said his one lap pace isn't there. And I think if he can nail that, then he's got a good chance at finishing in the top 8 in the standings. But that isn't where he wants to be. And it's not where the team want to be. And similarly, Dennis, he, like you said, LA, he's got all that pressure of being reigning F3 champion. Oscar Piastri won F3 in his rookie season, won F2 in his rookie season. and it set a precedent which in some ways is not helpful for these young drivers. That if Charles Leclerc, Charles Leclerc had an amazing junior career, George Russell had an amazing junior career, they can't all be expected to do that. And I think that someone like Dennis, he's still getting to grips with the car. It's a massive step from F3 to F2. And while Logan Sargent, Jack Doohan have managed to get to grips quite quickly, although Jack, if you look at the beginning of the season, like you said, Fraser, like Jack did have it took him a while. So I think expecting them to get to grips with that big jump straight away is quite a lot of pressure for them to deal with. And I think Dennis has had a few hard rounds, and some of them are not his fault. Like Silverstone, that crash with Nissany, that was nothing to do with Dennis. So he's had some bad luck. He's had some tough weekends. And I think he sounded, when I spoke to him last week, like he was really just wanting to put that behind him and really crack on in the second half of the season. And then obviously this weekend didn't go to plan either. So I think they're just both going to be looking ahead, trying to nail qualifying and trying to get some of that upward momentum, given that their team won both titles last year and the year before.
Not just one, but dominated, didn't they? And it just seems so un-Prema-like that they, are struggling like they are this season. Can they turn it around before the end of the season, or will they be? Will the team be focusing on next season, Megan?
I think that at this point, they're not going to win. They're not going to, they're not going to win either title at this point. But I think that if I was Prema, if I was Renee, I would be just trying to learn what lessons they can from the last few rounds to take that into next year. As you said, we don't obviously at this point know who's going to be driving for them in F2 next year. They've got a very, very strong F3 lineup at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see who of that lineup, if any, is moved up into F2. Ollie Behrman had a fantastic weekend at Spa. Arthur Leclerc is always great, and Jack Crawford had an unlucky weekend, but is very quick, most of the time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. But I think for this year in F2, they are just going to have to chalk it down as a lessons learned, I think, because it has been a difficult year. I don't think that's either driver's fault, and I don't think that's the team's fault. I think it's been a combination of factors, and I think given that they are such a strong team with such a track record of winning, I think that they will be able to take things from this that will make them stronger again next year. I don't doubt that from Renee's leadership. Like he's a great team principal, and I think that it has been difficult this year, but I think that will motivate them even more for next year.
They had a really tough season in 2019, didn't they? And they came back to win the championship the following year, following 2 years, to be fair, including last year as well. So I'm sure they will bounce back. They're a class act, aren't they? Let's talk about Ollie Caldwell, LA. He is returning this weekend after his race ban. Will he have learnt his lesson from? Will he keep it inside the white lines this weekend?
Well, let's hope so. Well, first of all, I'm glad to see that they changed Tatiana's initials from the timings on the screens. It was CAL until the feature race. So that was something I noted and thought, no, that can't be right when he comes back, because Tatiana will be racing as well. So it's been changed to TCA, Tatiana Calderon. So anyway, we'll give him a car, and a good car. He'll be a good driver. We've seen a little spark of promise from him this season. We've seen what he can do, even though he has had quite a rough season, quite a hard learning season for him, and he is definitely learning the hard way. But sometimes that isn't a bad thing. It's what was it, something about Edison? What did he say about learning? How not to do something. That's what you learn. So he's not necessarily learning how to become a great, amazing world championship racing driver. He's learning how just to not be a bad one. So I'm sure he knows his track limits, and it was a shame in a way that he was banned from this race this weekend, because if he'd have exceeded the track limits in Spa, he would have been in the gravel, and that would have been a massive, bigger lesson learned than just sitting. He actually wasn't sitting at home, was he? He was in the paddock. We saw him on the TV screen, so we saw him at the race. There's a couple of gravel traps, as you said a bit earlier. Let's see if he finds them this weekend, and that will be his punishment if he does. But it sounds really condescending. I sound like a school teacher. Why have you asked me this question?
Do you know what though? It's a good point, because there have been way too many drivers getting way too many penalty points this season.
It's been crazy. And some of them have sort of said, "Oh, it's so hard to keep it on the track. It's so hard." And I thought, well, what about the others, the ones that aren't exceeding the track limits? They're managing it. They're doing it. So it's definitely a driver management thing. Is if every single driver was coming off the circuit and exceeding those track limits, then fair enough, there is a problem, and that would need looking at. But they're not all doing it. So maybe you certainly can't look at drivers that aren't in your team, but if you have a teammate that's managing to keep it within the track limits, then I think that's where the learning is. They need to start working together as a team, probably a little bit better. And certainly at VAR, we had at Van Amersfoort, we had a Maori Cordial again, with a black and white flag this weekend. So, that's something that I would really like to see a massive team effort going into. And we can't forget, of course, that it is their home race weekend this weekend too. And as we just said, they had a very, very good weekend this weekend. So let's see what they can do.
The thing is as well, I think with the penalty points and with the track limits, it is the same people. It's the same people with the penalty points and the accidents and the poor driving standards. And I think, you're getting people having bans. You're getting people very near to getting bans. F3 are managing it. So what, I just think when there are drivers with very few penalty points and there are a select few drivers with a lot of penalty points, you do have to wonder what are the teams saying? What are the drivers being told? Like, what are they? Because as you said, LA, if everyone else is managing it, you can see the white line, it looks the same for everyone. What's the problem? And I think gravel traps like at Spa are a great solution to that, because if you mess up, you are going to be in the gravel and that's your race over. And that's a good way of learning, because penalty points really, until you reach, 11 or 10, you just start, oh, well, it's just there. Whereas if you hit a gravel trap and your race is over, then you've learned. You're not going to do it again. You're going to come back next year and you're going to go, I hit that gravel trap last year, so I'll stay well away from it. So I think you're right about teammates as well. And I think a lot of the problems there might have come from the inconsistency in some of the lineups, with some of the teams having had like several drivers. Like, if you look at Campos, you look at Charouz, and you look at Van Amersfoort, they've all had like 4 drivers in the 2 seats over the season, and there's been quite a lot of inconsistency. So I think Ollie hopefully will come back, and now that Ralph's back, and hopefully Ralph is back again this weekend, they can get a bit more consistency and iron out any of those problems that they've had going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think there's gravel traps anyway, right? Because I actually think that they're quite a good safety element as well to the circuits, because it means that the cars aren't necessarily sometimes they can if they're going that quick, but they maybe, can stop them from going into the barriers as well. Yes, it's the end of their race, but if they hit a barrier, it's the end of their race. So
yeah, they evidently were really helpful in F3 with the Zane Maloney and Oliver Goethe crash. Like, yes, they crashed into the barrier. Yes, they made contact. But the fact, if that gravel trap hadn't been there, I dread to think how much worse it could have been. And I'm, amazing news that they were both okay after that quite horrible accident. But I think that the gravel trap played a really big part in slowing them down before they did make contact with the barrier and then each other. So I think you're completely right. Gravel traps are a good thing. Because otherwise, think of Paul Ricard. You just, it's just gone off and it doesn't matter and I'll just come back on again. So I think having gravel traps is a really good measure for everyone to ensure track limits are kept to and not just ignored.
It does solve that issue, doesn't it? And as you say, Le Castellet, Red Bull Ring, if you're listening, you know what to do, because it solves that issue, doesn't it? You've just mentioned about teammates there, Megan. Obviously, Ollie Caldwell's teammate, hopefully for this weekend, is going to be Ralph Boschung. If he's fit enough, do you think he should be fit enough? He should be returning this weekend?
Hopefully. He said after the sprint race on Saturday that at that point that his neck was holding up okay. So I haven't spoken to him since the feature race, and he hasn't posted on social media or anything, but hopefully he has, not woken up this morning with a very sore neck, because the problem that he's got is something that can really, really affect you. And he said that at one point he couldn't do any training because he had to keep his neck as mobile as possible. So fingers crossed, Ralph, if you're listening, your neck's okay. But yeah, it's one of those things where hopefully it's not affected him too badly, and he can return this weekend, and then Campos can get that consistency back in with Ralph and with Ollie, and keep that momentum for the last few rounds of the season.
Absolutely. Looking forward to hopefully seeing Ralph Boschung back again this weekend, because as we said in the past, every time Ralph Boschung seems to get in the car, he seems to put it, third, fourth, fifth, somewhere around that area, doesn't he? So doing a great job. Okay, that's all we have time for today. My thanks to LA and to Megan for joining us on today's show. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure you give it a like, subscribe for more Formula 2 content. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.